The NHS are saying that the £22.6 billion extra funding that they are being given by our so generous Labour Party is not enough. They need more. They need more on the £181 billion that the NHS spends already for 3-week-long waiting lists to get to your doctor and 2-year waiting lists for a hip replacement. Or, as one friend of mine once told me, her husband had a 6-month wait for a serious heart condition. Okay, I'm Grannyopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Now, according to this article here, the NHS is getting a raise of £22.6 billion. I'm assuming they are using the American billion. I mean, it could be the British billion, but hardly anyone uses that anymore, and I don't think our whole gross national product would amount to that. So let's assume we're talking about the American billion. £22.6 billion funding boost in England is not enough, warn health experts, which interested me. So they're going to get £22.6 billion. Now, underneath this underneath this X, one of the comments points out that NASA gets 22 billion. Actually, that's not quite right. The budget for NASA, 24.875 billion. Well, it's fairly close. And that is, in British money, 19, more or less, 19 billion pounds. So it's fairly close. I mean, what are a couple of billion between friends? Now, the budget is, for NASA, is more or less $25 billion. They use that to send rockets to the moon and research vehicles out to orbit Saturn. And they do it on a budget of what in Britain would be £19 billion. And our NHS is getting a £22.6 billion raise. So I thought, well, how much does the NHS get in total? The Chancellor announced a £22 billion increase in total health and social care revenue and capital funding as part of a 2-phase spending review. NHS England's ring-fenced revenue budget will increase by 4.7% this year to £181.4 billion. And then another 3.3% next year to 192 billion. It says here, health experts say that's not enough. I don't think you can find a health expert more expert than Professor Carol Sikora, who has credentials from Cambridge and is a world-renowned authority on oncology. And he tweeted this, 22 billion not enough for the NHS? What would be enough? 50 billion? 100 billion? Well, 100 billion isn't enough, is it? Because they're already getting 181 billion, and that's going to increase to 192 billion pretty soon. There's got to be something wrong here, hasn't there? There are some very interesting comments down here. One of them was this: a senior nurse I know was forced by human resources to hire a junior nurse for a role that she wasn't suitable for. After day one, the junior nurse went sick from stress and was only heard from a year later when she asked if she could have a reference. And I thought you might be interested in the beginnings of a video I was going to be making when some answers had been found. You may be interested to know, my correspondent said, that Northampton General Hospital have installed extra special additional signs on their pedestrian crossing. I noticed the signs on a crossing used in my recent visit to see a patient in the hospital. Although the image attached is of one that I have Googled, it is exactly the same as the two signs displayed. Now, this is interesting because if this correspondent Googled this image, it means they are all over the place and they are specially made. So it means somebody is funding all of this and somebody is paying for it. And for sure, Northampton General Hospital will have paid for this sign, not only buying the sign, but, of course, installing it. And believe me, when you install something like that, it's not just a matter of a little man going out there and nailing it up. You have to do safety assessments. You have to pay somebody for inspecting the engineering of it so, it doesn't fly off and slice somebody's head off. So it's not just the sign, which is probably overpriced anyway and will have to be made of certain tested materials. Remember, somebody's got to be paid to test that this will hold up to an English winter or whatever. And there's a whole economy around this sort of thing. Although the image attached is of one I've Googled, it's exactly the same as the two signs displayed. So there's one here on one side of the road and one on the other side of the road. I have written to the hospital authority, he said, to query the matter, as I feel that it's merely they're playing a part in the many UK authorities' woke virtue signalling. In part of their response, they say that it is to indicate the hospital's inclusion and diversity support of the LGBTQ community. Now, there's a whole correspondence going on. I did intend to devote an entire video to it, and I will do, but I couldn't ignore it when talking about the latest budgetary requirements for the NHS, because I have to point this out. The correspondence that this person is engaging in is also expensive, and he has been moved from one department to the other as the correspondence multiplies, each justifying their own part in the provision of this, and none of them answering the question of why that's necessary. They did say, well, we want to show how welcoming we are to the LGBTQ plus whatever community. But my correspondent said, are you doing that the same thing for deaf people, for instance, or people with some sort of neurodivergency? I was tempted to say, are they doing a sort of push-button speaking sign for people with visual handicaps? Well, anyway, this is where our money's going, because you see what happens when you have a bureaucracy, it has a tendency to inflate. There was a book called, amusingly, The Law and the Profits, but the profits was not spelt as in a prophet, like a seer, like somebody who can tell you when you're doing wrong, Prophet, but Profit, Profit, and it was by C. Northcote Parkinson, and he talked about bureaucracies multiplying to fill the space available. And here we have an example of another bureaucracy, and it is just a bureaucracy now, that is expanding to fill the space available. Not the doctors and the nurses, but the bureaucracy, who do nothing but push papers around and buy LGBTQ crossing signs. And because of that, 22 billion extra will never be enough. 50 billion will never be enough. As Professor Sikora says, 100 billion will never be enough. It's like a bureaucracy is a sort of black hole that will suck in anything that's nearby or offered to it. Till next time, you can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.